Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to Tudor England, a world of grand palaces, stunning fashion, and absolutely horrifying healthcare. Imagine you have a simple headache. You don't reach for an aspirin. Instead, a man with a rusty knife and questionable hygiene offers you two equally terrible choices. He can either bleed you with leeches or drill a small hole in your skull to let the bad humors out. This was an age when medicine was a terrifying lottery, and the doctor was often more dangerous than the disease. Spoiler alert, your chances of surviving the cure were often worse than your chances of surviving the sickness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've woken up in Tudor England, and you have a cough. It's not a dramatic, lung-rattling cough, just a tickle in your throat. But in the 16th century, a simple cough is an invitation to chaos. It's a sign that your internal machinery is on the fritz, and the man you're about to call for repairs has the medical knowledge of an astrologer and the delicate touch of a butcher. The most dangerous thing about getting sick in the Tudor era wasn't the disease, it was the cure. Forget everything you know about modern medicine. In this world, there are no germs, no viruses, no cells. All of that is fussy, complicated nonsense for the future to worry about. Your body, according to the most learned men of your time, is not a complex biological system. It is, essentially, a smoothie. A poorly mixed smoothie made of 4 essential and frankly disgusting ingredients: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. This wasn't some cutting-edge Tudor innovation. It was a 1,500-year-old theory cooked up by the ancient Greeks. It was a hand-me-down idea so old that no one thought to question it, mostly because arguing with a guy who's been dead for over a millennium was considered bad form. This theory, the theory of the 4 humors, was the disastrously flawed operating system for your entire existence. Get the recipe wrong, and you die. The entire system was a masterpiece of elaborate systematic gibberish. Each of your internal fluids had a personality, like the cast of a terrible sitcom. Blood, associated with springtime and the element of air, was the fun one. An abundance of it made you sanguine, cheerful, charismatic, and the life of the party. Phlegm, linked to winter and water, was the lazy, boring one. Too much of it made you phlegmatic, calm, unemotional, and probably the last person to get a joke. Yellow bile, the humor of summer and fire, was the angry one. It was your inner Karen, making you choleric, ambitious, aggressive, and prone to flying into a rage because a peasant looked at you funny. And finally, there was black bile, the humor of autumn and earth. This was the sad, emo one. An excess of black bile made you melancholic, artistic, depressive, and the kind of person who found a skull to be a thoughtful piece of home decor. Your entire identity, from your social life to your career prospects, was dictated by the specific character of your personal, internal sludge. When you got sick, this personality test became a direct diagnosis. It was beautifully simple. Illness wasn't an infection, it was an imbalance. Your cough isn't caused by anything you breathed in. No, that would be far too logical. Your doctor, a man who will spend more time looking at your astrological chart than at you, will stroke his beard and declare that you have an excess of cold and moist phlegm. It's a simple case of your inner winter overstaying its welcome. Do you have a fever and a flushed face? Obviously, you have too much hot, aggressive blood bubbling in your veins. Feeling a bit down and writing bad poetry? Congratulations. You're practically drowning in black bile, and it's a miracle you can even be bothered to get out of bed. The doctor's job wasn't to heal you, it was to rebalance you. He was less of a physician and more of a deeply unqualified and dangerously confident bartender, trying to fix a bad cocktail by randomly pouring ingredients out onto the floor. He saw your body as a simple machine, and his job was to perform some very aggressive maintenance. And his primary tool for this maintenance was a knife, because, in the simple, brutal logic of the four humours, if every sickness is just a case of having too much of a certain fluid, then the only logical cure is to get it out of you, violently. This theory, as simple and elegant as it was lethally wrong, gave doctors a script. It allowed them to project an aura of absolute confidence while performing acts of spectacular medical incompetence. They could explain every illness without ever having to trouble themselves with little things like evidence, observation, or results. And it gave you, the patient, a framework for your suffering. You weren't the victim of a random, invisible killer. You were just a bit imbalanced. You were a finely tuned lute that had gone out of tune, and this learned man in a fur-trimmed robe was here to fix you. So, you're sick. Your internal smoothie is all wrong. The recipe for you has been corrupted. And a man who smells faintly of wine and self-importance, carrying a leather bag filled with sharp objects, is about to explain his plan to restore your balance. Spoiler, you are not going to like it. So, you're sick. Your internal smoothie is all wrong. Who do you call? In Tudor England, the answer to that question depends entirely on the weight of the purse you're holding. Medicine, like everything else, was a brutal class system. There was healthcare for the rich, and then there was something else for everyone else. Let's imagine, for a moment, that you are wealthy. Congratulations, you can afford the very best. A university-trained physician. This man is the absolute pinnacle of medical authority. He arrives at your home dressed in robes so fine they probably cost more than a peasant's entire farm. He speaks fluent Latin, smells faintly of expensive wine, and carries an air of profound, unshakable confidence. He is a man of science, or, at least, what passed for science in an age that still thought mice were spontaneously generated from piles of dirty laundry. His diagnostic process is a magnificent and deeply unhelpful piece of theatre. He will not ask for a detailed list of your symptoms. That is far too modern. Instead, he will begin by inspecting your urine. You are expected to provide him with a morning sample in a special glass flask. He will hold this flask up to the light with the focused, critical eye of a wine connoisseur judging a new vintage. He will study its colour, its turbidity, its sediment. He has an elaborate chart, a rainbow of potential urine colours, each corresponding to a specific humoral imbalance. Is it a pale straw colour? An excess of phlegm? Is it reddish and cloudy? Far too much blood? He might even take a delicate sniff, or, for a truly dedicated physician, a tiny, diagnostic taste. Having thoroughly judged your bodily fluids, he moves on to the next, and far more important, phase of the diagnosis, astrology. He will unroll a complex astrological chart, a map of the heavens, and cross-reference it with the exact date and time your symptoms began. His primary concern is not the state of your lungs, but the current emotional state of the planet Mars. Ah, he might declare, with a grave expression. Just as I suspected. Your cough began when Saturn was in opposition to Jupiter, a clear case of celestial malevolence aggravating a naturally phlegmatic disposition. According to your doctor, you are not just sick. You are the victim of a planetary conspiracy. If you died, it wasn't your doctor's fault. It was astrology. Now, let's flip the coin. Let's imagine you are not a wealthy lord, but a common farmer. Your child is sick. You cannot afford the man with the star charts and the Latin phrases. For the poor, medicine looked more like improvisation. You must turn to the cheaper options available to you, the local wise woman or village healer. She is not a university man. She is likely an old woman who lives at the edge of the village, a person regarded with a mixture of desperate need and fearful suspicion. Her knowledge comes not from ancient Greek texts, but from a lifetime of experience and a rich, unwritten tradition of herbal lore and folk magic passed from mother to daughter. Her visit is a different kind of theatre. There are no fur-trimmed robes or astrological charts. She arrives at your small, dark cottage, smelling of wood smoke and strange herbs. Her diagnostic process is one of ritual and superstition. She might crack an egg into a bowl of water and read your child's fate in the patterns of the yolk. She might mutter a chant to ward off the evil eye, which she suspects a jealous neighbor has cast upon your family. She will listen to your child's breathing, feel their forehead for fever, and look at their tongue, her observations, a practical counterpoint to her magical beliefs. Her advice will be a chaotic, but occasionally effective cocktail of genuine herbalism and pure superstition. She will instruct you to brew a tea from willow bark to combat the fever, a remedy we now know works because willow bark contains a natural form of aspirin. This is the part that might actually save your child's life. However, she will also instruct you to hang a bag of garlic around your child's neck to frighten away the disease spirits, and perhaps to find a live spider, wrap it in a silk pouch, and have your child wear it until the spider dies, supposedly taking the sickness with it. She is part pharmacist, part witch doctor. Her methods a jumble of the effective, the absurd, and the deeply unsanitary. So, who had the better deal? The rich man paying a fortune for a physician to blame his illness on a grumpy planet? Or the poor man relying on a village healer whose cures involved 1 part effective herbalism and 2 parts bothering a spider? The truth, as I have seen it time and again, is that your chances were probably better with the witch. At least some of her remedies, born of centuries of trial and error, worked by accident. The physician's remedies, born of pure, unadulterated theory, worked only to lighten your purse before they lightened your mortal coil. Whether you visited the expensive, astrology-obsessed physician or the superstitious village healer, your diagnosis was likely the same. Your humours were out of balance. And in Tudor England, there was one primary, universally accepted, and terrifyingly direct method for restoring that balance. The philosophy was simple. When in doubt, take something out. Welcome to the wonderful world of bloodletting. The logic, from their perspective, was flawless. If your body is a container that is dangerously overfilled with a bad or excessive humour, the fastest way to fix it is to open a tap and let some out. It was plumbing, not medicine. This single, simple idea became the universal solution for nearly every ailment known to man. Do you have a fever? That is clearly an excess of hot, aggressive blood. We must drain some out. Are you suffering from a pounding headache? The pressure in your skull is too great. We must drain some out. Are you overcome with deep, inconsolable sadness or melancholy? Your system is drowning in black bile, which has corrupted the blood. We must drain it out. Gout, pneumonia, indigestion, a broken heart, a stubbed toe, it did not matter. The first and often only tool in the doctor's toolbox was a knife. The process was straightforward. Let's imagine you are the patient. The doctor, or more likely the cheaper and more practical barber surgeon, would sit you in a chair. He would produce his tools from a leather roll. You would see elegant brass or steel lancets, designed for the specific purpose of opening a vein. These tools were, of course, not sterilized. The concept of germs was centuries away. The lancet was likely wiped clean on the same dirty rag used for the previous patient, and the one before that. The surgeon would tie a strip of cloth tightly around your upper arm, and the vein on the inside of your elbow would bulge, a perfect blue target. He would select his lancet, and with a quick, practiced motion that was part science and part butchery, slice open the vein. The blood would flow, a warm crimson stream, into a special calibrated bowl held by an assistant. This was the crucial part. The doctor would watch the blood with the intense focus of a fortune teller reading tea leaves. Was it too dark? Too thick? Did it contain flecks of other humours? He would make grand pronouncements as he watched your very life force drain away into a pot. "Ah, just as I suspected," he might declare. "The blood is far too choleric." The goal was to remove a specific amount, perhaps a pint, or sometimes just to keep draining until you, the patient, mercifully fainted from blood loss. At that point, the doctor would staunch the bleeding with a bandage and proudly declare that the worst of the illness had been expelled. If the idea of being sliced open with a knife was too alarming for your delicate sensibilities, there was a gentler, more sophisticated, and infinitely more disgusting alternative: leeches. Then there were the leeches, the quiet, wriggling assistants to nearly every colonial doctor. Your physician would produce a large glass jar filled with water and a collection of dark, slimy, slug-like creatures. They were often kept in jars of water like pickled grapes, prized for their seemingly magical ability to draw out bad blood. This was considered the premium service, a biological solution for a biological problem. The application of these medical assistants was an art in itself. For a headache, the physician would apply them to the temples. For a fever, perhaps to the feet. For a swollen joint, directly onto the swelling. You would lie there, trying not to move. As the doctor placed the cold, wriggling creatures onto your skin, you would feel a series of tiny, sharp pricks as the leeches attached themselves with their three-bladed jaws, followed by a strange, cold, and deeply unsettling sucking sensation. There they would remain, sometimes for hours, feasting on your blood until they became swollen and bloated, growing to 10 times their original size. The best part of the leech treatment was the grand finale. When the leeches were full and dropped off of their own accord, the doctor would proudly hold one up for your inspection. He would point to the fat, black, blood-gorged creature as undeniable proof of a successful treatment. "You see," he would say, with a smug smile, "look at all the corrupted humour it has removed." You, meanwhile, would be left weak, dizzy, and covered in small, bleeding wounds that refuse to clot, as leech saliva contains a natural anticoagulant. Whether you were treated with a knife or a leech, the aftermath was the same. You were left pale, anemic, and significantly weaker than you were before the treatment began. The open wound, whether from the lancet or the leech bites, was a perfect, open doorway for infection in a world where no one washed their hands. Many patients survived their initial illness only to die a few days later from a fever caused by the unhygienic cure. Yet, even when the patient worsened or died, the theory of bloodletting remained unblemished. "He was too far gone," the doctor would say, shaking his head gravely. "We simply started the treatment too late." In their minds, the logic was perfect. The only thing that had failed was your body. You would be sent home with instructions to rest and drink weak broth. You would feel lightheaded and exhausted, but your doctor would be confident. He would have looked you in the eye and confidently declared that your humours are rebalancing. Bloodletting was the perfect Tudor treatment. It was dramatic. It produced a visible, tangible result, a bowl full of your own blood. And it had a certain scientific feeling ritual to it. It was, in short, a masterpiece of medical theatre. And as Europe bled itself pale in the name of balance, the true diseases carried on, entirely unimpressed by the spectacle. So, the doctor has drained a pint of your precious blood, and you still have a cough. By his own logic, this can only mean one thing. The bad humours are more stubborn than he thought, and a more aggressive approach is required. Bloodletting was just the opening act in the grand, violent theatre of Tudor medicine. Welcome to Phase 2, the Great Evacuation. The philosophy was simple. If the corruption wouldn't come out through a polite, well-placed incision in your arm, it would have to be forcibly evicted through every other available exit. This was a two-pronged attack on your body's unfortunate desire to keep things inside itself. Your doctor would now prescribe powerful emetics to induce vomiting and purgatives to act as laxatives. If the imbalance was in the upper body, an excess of phlegm causing your cough, for example, the preferred route of exit was the mouth. If the problem was lower down, like an angry yellow bile causing digestive distress, a southern evacuation was in order. In either case, your immediate future was about to become extremely unpleasant, undignified, and busy. Let's say the doctor decides on an emetic. He will hand you a potion, a vile-tasting concoction of wine, salt, mustard, and other ingredients chosen for their spectacular ability to offend the human stomach. The taste is the first part of the treatment. It is so foul that your body's immediate and violent rejection of it is seen as a sign that the medicine is already working. You drink it down, and you wait. The next several hours of your life are a miserable blur of heaving, retching, and staring at the bottom of a ceramic bowl. You are not alone in your misery, however. Your doctor will often stay to observe the process, watching the contents of your stomach with the keen, analytical interest of a prospector panning for gold. He is looking for traces of the offending humour. "Ah, you see?" he might exclaim, pointing at a string of mucus. "The corrupt phlegm is being expelled. A marvellous success." You, meanwhile, are too busy trying not to die to appreciate his diagnostic genius. This violent cleansing was a cornerstone of Tudor healthcare. The logic, as ever, was brutal and simple. If you weren't purging, sweating, or bleeding, you weren't getting better. But what exactly was in these miraculous, gut-wrenching potions? This is where we leave the realm of flawed theory and enter the wonderful, terrifying, and deeply unsanitary world of the Tudor apothecary. The ingredients for these cures were a grotesque menagerie of animal, mineral, and occasionally human parts, all chosen for reasons that hovered somewhere between folk magic and sheer insanity. For a truly premium and effective cure, your doctor might prescribe a dose of powdered mummy. Yes, literal ground-up corpses imported from Egypt. The belief was that the bitumen and resins used in the mummification process held powerful medicinal properties. There was also a more mystical idea that by consuming the remains of a great and powerful pharaoh, some of that power might be transferred to you. Nothing says healthcare quite like a dash of pharaoh dust. If fresh mummies were in short supply, local ingredients would have to do. The powdered skull of a man who had died a violent death was considered particularly potent for curing headaches, a grimly literal interpretation of a hair of the dog that bit you. The rest of the apothecary's shelf looked less like a pharmacy and more like a madman's pantry. Jars were filled with dried and powdered earthworms, which were a popular remedy for stomach aches and cramps. Why? The logic, presumably, was that worms live in the earth, and the earthy humour of black bile governed the digestive system. It makes a certain kind of horrifying sense, if you don't think about it too hard. You might also find powdered donkey hooves, believed to be a cure for epilepsy, or crushed frogs, which were sometimes brewed into potions to treat coughs. The preparation of these remedies was its own bizarre ritual. Ingredients were not just mixed, they were prepared according to strict astrological schedules. A potion might only be effective if its ingredients were gathered under a full moon and brewed while Mercury was in retrograde. This added another layer of expensive and unfalsifiable complexity to the process. If the potion of crushed human bone and earthworms failed to cure you, it was not because the theory was insane. It was because the alchemist had clearly failed to account for the influence of Saturn. You, the patient, would be handed a small, intimidatingly dark bottle of this concoction. You would drink it because the alternative was to be seen as questioning the wisdom of your doctor, a man of science and learning. And so, you would swallow your dose of powdered corpse, your boiled worms, your crushed frogs, and whatever other horrors the apothecary had seen fit to include. And when the inevitable, violent, and deeply unpleasant purges and vomiting began, you would lie back in your sweat-soaked bed, miserable and weak, but with a flicker of hope. The medicine was working. The doctor had said so. You had successfully been cleansed of your excess humours, and possibly of your will to live. The great evacuation was a success, And if you still felt sick tomorrow, well, there was always more blood to let. When the potions, purges, and prayers have all failed, and your body is still stubbornly refusing to rebalance itself, the Tudor medical world moves on to its final, most dramatic, and most terrifying option. The physician, with his soft hands and his Latin theories, will shake his head, declare your case to be a matter for a different kind of professional, and collect his fee. It is time to call in the man with the blades. It is time to call the barber surgeon. In the rigid hierarchy of Tudor medicine, the university-trained physician was the aristocrat. He was a gentleman who dealt in theories, charts, and expensive prescriptions. The barber surgeon, on the other hand, was a craftsman, a tradesman. Often it was the same man who trimmed your beard that also sawed off your leg. He was the backbone of early medicine, a practical man who could cut hair, draw teeth, bleed a fever, and amputate a leg, often in the same afternoon. The physician would charge you a fortune to tell you why you were dying. The barber surgeon would charge a much smaller fee to actually saw off the bit that was killing you. You would find his shop by its famous sign, a striped pole, red for blood, white for bandages. It was a cheerful, candy-striped advertisement for medieval hemorrhage. Inside, the shop would smell of hair, soap, and, on certain days, blood and fear. This was not a place of quiet consultation. It was a bustling public workshop where you could get a haircut, hear the latest gossip, and, if the need arose, have a limb removed. Let's imagine the need has arisen. You've had a bad fall from a horse, your leg is shattered, and after a week of the physician's useless poultices, the wound has begun to rot. The telltale blackness of gangrene is creeping up your shin. The physician has failed. Your humours are beyond balancing. The barber surgeon is your last, terrifying hope. He examines the leg, not by consulting the stars, but with a practical, craftsman's eye. He prods the blackened flesh, sniffs the air around it, and shakes his head. "It'll have to come off," he says, with the same calm finality a carpenter might use to condemn a rotten piece of wood. When in doubt, amputate might as well have been the colonial motto. There is no sterile operating theatre. The surgery was performed on rough wooden tables, perhaps your own kitchen table, wiped down with seawater. There are no anesthetics, of course. The concept is a fantasy. Your only painkiller was strong drink and prayers. An operation without rum was unthinkable for both patient and surgeon. A large jug of ale or rum is brought. You are given a generous amount, not enough to kill the pain, but hopefully enough to blur the edges of the horror to come. The rest is for the surgeon. He needs a steady hand, after all. Your two strongest friends are summoned. Their job is not to offer comfort, but to act as human clamps. Patients were held down by friends or assistants, because even the bravest soul will try to flee when the saw meets the bone. You are told to bite down on a leather strap while your friends hold you still. The surgeon lays out his surgical kit, which looked more like a carpenter's toolbox, a collection of terrifyingly simple bone saws, scalpels, needles, and clamps, polished from use. He works quickly. Speed is his only form of mercy. A good surgeon wasn't the one who caused the least pain. He was the one who finished before the pain could kill you from shock. A good surgeon could amputate a leg in under 2 minutes. He takes a long, sharp knife. He makes the first cut, circling the leg, slicing through skin, muscle, and sinew in a few swift, practiced motions. Your world dissolves into a white-hot nova of pure, screaming agony. Before you can even process that horror, he puts down the knife and picks up the saw. You hear it before you feel it, a rough, grating sound as the teeth bite into your femur. The vibration shudders through your entire body. Your friends, their faces pale with sweat and pity, throw their full weight onto your shoulders and your remaining leg, holding you down against your body's desperate animal instinct to escape. The surgeon works with a brutal, rhythmic efficiency. his face a mask of intense concentration. Then there is a final, sickening crack and a sudden, shocking release of pressure. The sawing stops. Your leg is gone. But the ordeal is not over. The stump is a fountain of blood. The surgeon's assistant hands him a new tool, a long iron poker, its tip glowing a hellish, bright red from the fireplace. To stop the bleeding, the wound must be cauterized. You smell your own flesh burning before you feel the searing, unimaginable pain as the hot iron is pressed against the raw stump. The smell of burnt cloth and roasted meat fills the room. Often the patient simply fainted. Fainting was a blessing. You survived the procedure. You are now lying in your bed, minus one leg, delirious with pain and fever. You have won the first battle. Now begins the second, and far more deadly, war. The war against infection. In this age, infection was inevitable, but no one understood why. In fact, the pus that would begin to ooze from your wound a few days later was seen as a good sign. Doctors called it laudable pus, believing it was proof that the body was expelling the bad humors. In truth, it was your body losing the battle against sepsis. The surgeon has done his job. He has removed the gangrenous limb. He will return to his shop to sharpen his tools and wait for the next customer. Whether you live or die now is a matter for God, luck, and the strength of your own constitution. You might think that the butchery and bleeding you just endured was simply the grim reality of being a commoner. You might imagine that the king, in his magnificent palaces, surrounded by the most learned and expensive physicians in the land, had access to a higher, more effective form of medicine. You would be dangerously, catastrophically wrong. The truth is, the richer and more powerful you were in Tudor England, the more enthusiastically the doctors would try to kill you with their cures. And no one was more powerful or more enthusiastically tormented by his own doctors than the king himself, Henry VIII. We all know the image of Henry in his prime, the broad-shouldered, athletic, formidable monarch who could joust, hunt, and dance with the best of them. But that is not the man we are talking about today. We are talking about the Henry of his later years, a man who had become a prisoner in his own decaying body, a bloated, paranoid, and perpetually enraged monarch, haunted by a pain that never, ever left him. The source of his agony was his legs. For years, he suffered from debilitating, suppurating ulcers on both of his thighs. These were not just a few sores. They were deep, open, weeping wounds, likely the result of old jousting injuries that had become chronically and catastrophically infected. The royal apartments, which should have smelled of power and rosewater, instead carried the foul, sweet stench of rotting flesh, a smell his terrified courtiers had to pretend not to notice. And what did the combined medical genius of the 16th century have to offer the most powerful man in their world? The exact same brand of well-intentioned, systematic torture that you, the commoner, would have received. The king's own physicians, the most respected men from Oxford and Cambridge, would gather around his bed, stroke their beards, and unleash their full arsenal of humoral incompetence. They bled him regularly, believing his rages were a sign of too much hot blood. They prescribed violent purges to cleanse his system of the choleric humours they believed were causing the inflammation in his legs. They put him on bizarre and contradictory diets, one day forbidding him from eating fruit, the next day commanding him to eat nothing but. The treatment for the ulcers themselves was a masterpiece of medieval brutality. The royal surgeons, with the king watching, would regularly cleanse the wounds. This involved lancing the swollen sores to release the bad humours and then scraping the dead flesh from the bone. The pain would have been so excruciating, it's a miracle it didn't kill him from shock. To stop the bleeding and purify the wound, they would sometimes cauterize it with a red-hot iron, the sizzle and the smell of the king's own burning leg filling the room. At other times, they would pack the open wounds with poultices made of ingredients that ranged from the merely useless to the actively harmful. But the king was not a passive patient. When you are an all-powerful monarch who has broken with the Catholic Church and declared himself the head of the Church of England, you naturally begin to assume you are better at everything than everyone else, including medicine. Henry VIII took a keen personal interest in the apothecary arts and even concocted his own remedies. He had his own book of recipes, a royal pharmacopoeia filled with his own improvements on the standard treatments. He was, in effect, performing a kind of high-stakes amateur alchemy on his own rotting flesh. His personal ointments were a testament to his royal ego and his medical ignorance. He would create plasters made from ground-up pearls and other precious stones, believing that the value and purity of the ingredients would surely overcome the impurity of his wounds. He experimented with compounds containing lead and mercury, the go-to miracle poisons of the age. Imagine the scene. The King of England, his leg propped up, grimacing in agony, personally directing the mixture of a new, fantastically expensive, and utterly useless paste that he himself had designed. His doctors, who knew it was nonsense but were also terrified of losing their heads, would have applied it with great ceremony, praising His Majesty's unparalleled medical genius. The true tragedy is that this constant, agonizing pain did not just destroy the king's body, it corrupted his mind and his rule. It is no coincidence that the beloved, athletic, bluff King Hal of his youth transformed into the monstrous, paranoid tyrant of his later years. It is hard to be a benevolent father of the nation when your own legs are on fire. His pain made him a monster. A single sharp twinge from his ulcerated shin could be a death sentence for a courtier who happened to say the wrong thing or tell a bad joke. The court learned to read the king's health in his face. A good day, when the pain was manageable, meant feasting and music. A bad day meant that everyone kept their heads down, spoke in whispers, and prayed they would not be the unlucky target of a pain-fueled royal rage. His failing health directly influenced the fate of his kingdom and his wives. In the end, the most powerful man in England was a prisoner, not in the Tower of London, but in his own decaying body, tormented by the best doctors his kingdom had to offer, who were powerless to do anything but inflict more pain. In the great, terrifying lottery of Tudor medicine, even the king could not buy a winning ticket. So, your doctor, whether he's a university-trained physician or a blood-stained barber surgeon, has made his diagnosis. He has confidently declared that you need to be bled, purged, or perhaps plastered with a concoction of boiled dog and maggots. But he is a man of theory, a diagnostician. He is not the one who will be grinding the donkey hooves or bottling the mercury. For that, he turns to the providers. In the sprawling, chaotic marketplace of Tudor healthcare, there were two main suppliers, the professional, respectable apothecary, and the unofficial, deeply suspicious wise woman. First, the apothecary. His shop was one of the most fascinating and terrifying places in any Tudor town. It was a sensory assault, a dark, aromatic cavern lined from floor to ceiling with hundreds of little wooden drawers and ceramic jars, each marked with a cryptic Latin label. The air was a thick, heady perfume of exotic spices, dried herbs, and strange, sharp chemical stenches. This was the laboratory where the physician's abstract and often insane theories were transformed into tangible, drinkable, and frequently disgusting reality. The apothecary was part pharmacist, part grocer, part alchemist, and part conman. He sold not just medicines, but also the rare sugars, spices, and wines the wealthy used in their kitchens. His shop was a bridge between the world of medicine and the world of luxury. Imagine you walk in, clutching a prescription from your physician. It's a slip of paper covered in a scrawl of Latin, a secret code between learned men. The apothecary would read it, stroking his chin thoughtfully, and show no surprise at all. A request for 1 ounce of powdered mummy, mixed with oil of scorpion and a dram of earthworm paste. A perfectly normal Tuesday. His job wasn't to question the science, it was to fill the order. He would go to his drawers, pulling out ingredients that looked like they belonged in a wizard's pantry rather than a medical establishment. He would grind the powdered mummy, yes, a literal ground-up corpse imported from Egypt with a mortar and pestle, mix it with the other grotesque components, and hand you the finished product in a small, expensive bottle, assuring you of its potency. He was the technician of the great humoral machine, a skilled craftsman who could produce any poison or placebo the doctor could dream up. But what if you couldn't afford the physician and the apothecary? For the vast majority of the population, healthcare came from a different source entirely. You would go to the village healer, the local cunning woman or wise woman. She was not a licensed professional. Her knowledge came not from dusty university texts, but from a practical, unwritten tradition passed down from mother to daughter. She was the community's repository of herbal knowledge, a living encyclopedia of folk remedies. But her practice was a world away from the apothecary's clean-ish shop. She was often viewed with a mixture of desperate respect and deep-seated fear. She could cure your child's fever, but whispers of witchcraft followed her everywhere. In a world where the line between healing and sorcery was dangerously thin, her very effectiveness made her a target. And yet, it is here, in the smoky cottage of the wise woman, that we find a genuine glimmer of hope. While the university doctors were busy bleeding their patients into an early grave, the wise women were working with a pharmacopoeia that contained remedies that actually, factually worked. They were the herbalists, the true guardians of practical medical knowledge. If you came to her with a fever and a headache, she would not consult the stars. She would go to her garden. She would give you a bitter tea brewed from the bark of a willow tree, a remedy used for centuries to treat pain and fever. She didn't know that willow bark contained a chemical called salicin, the natural ingredient that would one day be synthesized to create aspirin. She only knew what her grandmother had taught her, that it worked. Herbal medicine offered something colonial surgery never could: gentleness. While the surgeons offered the brutal finality of the sore, the wise woman offered the slow patience of nature. A tea of chamomile for an upset stomach, a poultice of yarrow to stop bleeding, foxglove, in careful doses, for a weak heart. These were remedies that often worked better than anything imported from London. Her practice was not based on a grand, flawed theory of the universe. It was based on generations of simple, practical observation. This plant helps a fever. This root soothes a cough. This leaf reduces swelling. Of course, her art was still deeply entangled with superstition. The wise woman would give you the effective willow bark tea, but she would also instruct you to drink it only when the moon was waxing, and to chant a prayer to a local saint while you did so. She might sell you a cure that was 1 part effective herbalism and 2 parts pure theatre, like a potion made of garlic, honey, and crushed frogs. She existed in a grey area between science and magic. But the crucial difference was this: the physician's entire practice was based on a theory that was fundamentally wrong. The wise woman's practice, for all its superstitious trappings, was based on a foundation of remedies that were demonstrably, if accidentally, right. This is the great, central irony of Tudor medicine. The official, university-educated and ferociously expensive physicians, with all their Latin and all their theories, were the ones peddling the most dangerous and useless cures. Meanwhile, the uneducated, feared, and often persecuted wise women of the countryside were the ones who held the keys to actual, effective healing. Your best chance of surviving an illness in the 16th century was to hope you got a healer who trusted her grandmother's garden more than she trusted a 1,500-year-old book. Just when you thought you had a handle on the medical dangers of the Tudor era, the bad humours, the questionable cures, the man who cuts your hair and also your leg off history decides to throw a new monster into the mix. This wasn't the old familiar terror of the plague, a disease whose rhythms and horrors were, by now, well known. This was something new. something fast, aggressive, and utterly baffling. It was a uniquely Tudor terror, an epidemic so strange and so devastating it became known across Europe as Sudor Anglicus. The English sweat. It was a disease that defied all the rules. Unlike the plague, which often festered in the crowded, filthy quarters of the poor, the sweat seemed to prefer the well-fed, healthy, and wealthy. It would sweep through the royal court or the halls of Oxford University, scything down, strapping young noblemen in the prime of their lives while leaving the starving beggars in the streets untouched. It came in waves, appearing suddenly in the summer months to wreak havoc for a few weeks before vanishing as mysteriously as it had arrived. It was a phantom, a predator, whose motives and methods were a complete and terrifying mystery. Imagine this. You wake up one morning feeling perfectly fine. You go about your day, perhaps attending to your business or managing your household. Then, in the afternoon, it begins. Not with a cough or a sneeze, but with a sudden, cold sense of apprehension, a premonition of doom that settles deep in your bones. This is immediately followed by a chill, a violent, bone-rattling cold that racks your entire body, no matter how many blankets you pile on. Severe headaches and sharp, stabbing pains in your neck, shoulders, and limbs come next. This is the first stage, the cold stage, and it could last for several hours. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the cold stage gives way to the hot. A raging fever takes hold, and with it comes the disease's horrifying signature, the profuse, deathly sweat. This is not the clean sweat of a hard day's work. It is a torrent, a deluge that soaks through your clothes, your sheets, your mattress, as if your body, in its panic, is trying to expel its very essence through your pores. The smell of it, according to those who survived, was uniquely foul, a sickly sweet odor that came to be known as the smell of death itself. You are burning with fever on the inside and drowning in your own sweat on the outside. But the true terror of the sweating sickness was its speed. The mortality was incredibly high, often occurring within 24 hours. You could be healthy at breakfast, sick by lunch, and buried by supper. The disease was a brutal, efficient deadline. If you survived the first 24 hours, your chances improved dramatically. But getting through that first day was a desperate, terrifying race against time. The court of Henry VIII was ravaged by it. It killed nobles, servants, and even some of the king's closest friends, forcing the terrified monarch to flee London and repeatedly move his court to avoid the invisible killer. The doctors, of course, were completely and utterly useless. They had never seen anything like it. They frantically applied their old, tired theories of the four humours, but nothing fit. Was it a corrupt miasma in the air? Was it an imbalance of the blood? They tried everything. They bled patients, which only seemed to hasten their deaths. They prescribed purges, which further dehydrated the already sweating victims. Nothing worked. The disease was a new, unknown enemy, and their ancient medical playbook was worthless against it. Out of this panic and confusion, a standard treatment eventually emerged, though it was born more of desperation than of science. The theory was that the disease was a poison that the body was trying to expel through sweat. Therefore, the only logical cure was to help the body sweat even more. This became a horrifying, ritualized torture. As soon as the first chill hit, you would be put to bed, buried under a mountain of heavy furs and blankets. A fire would be stoked until the room was as hot as a furnace. You were forbidden from moving, from even shifting a limb, and most cruelly of all, you were forbidden from taking even a single sip of water or cool liquid for the full 24 hours, as it was believed this would drive the poison back into the body. You were being forced to endure a raging fever and catastrophic fluid loss while being simultaneously heated from the outside and deprived of all liquid. In effect, the cure was to slowly cook and dehydrate the patient to death. Whether this brutal treatment helped at all is a matter of historical debate. Some believed it was the only way to survive. It is far more likely that it simply killed the weaker patients more quickly. All you knew was that you were lying in your bed, soaked and stinking, burning with fever, and dreaming of a single drop of cold water, while your family and your doctor stood over you, watching, waiting, and praying you would survive the cure. And then, the strangest part of the story, the disease raged in 5 great outbreaks. In 1485, 1508, 1517, 1528, and a final devastating appearance in 1551. After that, it was gone. It mysteriously disappeared from the face of the earth. It has never returned. To this day, we do not know for certain what it was. A virulent strain of influenza? A hantavirus? It remains one of history's greatest unsolved medical mysteries. It was a uniquely Tudor terror, a phantom that stalked the 16th century, a chilling reminder that in an age of profound medical ignorance, a new monster could emerge from the shadows at any time, and all the leeches, star charts, and powdered mummies in the world would be utterly powerless to stop it. When a terrifying and unknown disease like the sweating sickness appears, a disease that laughs at your theories of the 4 humours and ignores your most aggressive bloodletting, a new kind of medicine is born. It is the medicine of pure, frantic desperation. The rulebook is thrown out the window, and the doctors, apothecaries, and wise women of the age begin a frenzied period of experimentation. This was not the scientific method. This was the equivalent of a panicked chef throwing everything in the pantry into a pot and praying the result is edible. Welcome to the Tudor Pharmacopoeia, a catalogue of cures so strange and so disgusting they make leeches look like a pleasant spa treatment. Let's begin with a common ailment for the wealthy Tudor gentleman: gout. You are suffering from an agonizing, inflammatory pain in your big toe, a result of a rich diet of red meat and wine. Your physician, having already bled you to no effect, decides a more specialized, topical remedy is in order. He will not arrive with a cream from the apothecary. He will arrive with a sack, from which he will produce a very unhappy, red-haired dog. The recipe that follows is something you will try very hard to forget. The dog, along with a generous amount of lard and a healthy scoop of live maggots, is to be boiled alive until it renders down into a thick, gelatinous paste. This warm, fragrant ointment is then to be slathered generously onto your afflicted joint. The tone in which your doctor describes this is not one of cruelty or madness. It is a calm, matter-of-fact tone of a professional prescribing a standard treatment. The logic, as far as it can be called logic, is a form of sympathetic magic. Gout is a hot and angry disease associated with the humour of blood. Therefore, a creature with a hot, fiery temperament and colour, a red-haired dog, is the perfect antidote. The maggots? They are creatures of rot and decay, and it was believed they could consume the corruption within your joint. You are not participating in an act of horrifying animal cruelty. You are the beneficiary of a sophisticated, multifaceted, therapeutic approach. Or so you tell yourself as a servant applies the warm dog paste to your foot. Perhaps your ailment is less painful and more vain. You are a man of a certain age, and your hairline is beginning to recede. Your physician has a 2-step hair care routine for you. Step 1. You must procure a large quantity of beetles, crush them into a pulp, and mix them with water to create a stimulating wash. You are to wash your hair thoroughly with this beetle juice. Step 2, after rinsing, involves the application of a thick, pungent pomade made from rendered fox fat. The logic here is a little more straightforward. Foxes are famously hairy creatures. Therefore, applying their fat to your scalp will surely encourage your own hair to grow with a similar, vulpine vigor. The fact that you will now smell like a damp fox that has been rolling in dead insects is a small price to pay for a full head of hair. But the true genius of the Tudor pharmacy was reserved for internal ailments. Let us say you suffer from asthma, a terrifying condition that leaves you gasping for breath. The cure is simple, elegant, and alive. Your doctor or wise woman will prescribe a course of live animals. You are to take a small, live frog, or, if a frog is not available, a large garden spider. Coat it in a generous amount of butter to make it slippery, and swallow it whole. The belief was that as the creature died in your stomach, it would absorb the malignant spirits or corrupt humors that were causing your breathing difficulties. It was a kind of internal sacrifice, a tiny life for a chance at a full breath. Some recipes, like those from local wise women, were known to use crushed frogs as an alternative, but the live version was considered far more potent. You can only imagine the psychological fortitude required to look at a spider, look at a pat of butter, and decide that this is, in fact, your best medical option. This was the guiding principle behind so many of these cures, the idea of transference. A dried toad worn in a bag around the neck was thought to draw out the poison of the plague. A sheep's lung, pressed against the chest, was believed to cure pneumonia, the healthy organ absorbing the sickness of the diseased one. The world was a library of symbols, and every creature, every plant, held a secret power that could be unlocked if you were just brave, or desperate, enough to use it. The apothecary's shelves were filled with these strange sympathies. Ointments of snail slime for skin blemishes, syrups of woodlice for digestive complaints, and powders made from the gallstones of an ox to treat jaundice. It was a world where your medicine might have, just yesterday, been crawling in your garden or rooting through your trash. In a strange way, there was a certain logic to it all. It was an attempt to find order in the chaos of disease, to believe that for every ailment, nature had provided a corresponding, if disgusting, cure. In an age without a scientific method, without any understanding of what actually caused disease, medicine was not a science. It was a collection of stories, and in the face of a terrifying, inexplicable illness, the most desperate patients were willing to believe the most disgusting and outlandish stories, especially if they were told by a man in a confident voice, holding a jar full of spiders. After exploring the strange and often revolting world of animal and vegetable remedies, you might be craving something a little more scientific, something a bit cleaner. Well, you're in luck. The Tudor pharmacy had its share of pure, powerful, and terrifyingly modern-sounding chemical cures as well. And the undisputed king of this chemical arsenal, the era's miracle poison, was mercury. Mercury, or quicksilver, was a substance of deep fascination. It was a metal, yet it was liquid at room temperature. It was heavy, shimmering, and seemed to possess a life of its own. To the Tudor mind, which saw magic and meaning in everything, mercury wasn't just an element. It was a symbol of power, of transformation, of a mysterious, otherworldly potency. It was the perfect medicine for an age that valued drama over results, and its effects were nothing, if not dramatic. The logic was simple. Any substance powerful enough to make your body react so violently must be doing something important. The primary target for this powerful poison was a new and equally terrifying disease that had recently swept across Europe: syphilis, the Great Pox. It was a horrifying and deeply shameful illness, its victims suffering from painful rashes, weeping sores, decaying flesh, and, in its final stages, a descent into madness and death. Faced with such a relentless and gruesome enemy, patients were willing to try anything, and the physicians, armed with their new favorite chemical weapon, were happy to oblige. There were several popular methods for administering the mercury cure, each one a unique and inventive form of torture. The simplest was to drink it. Apothecaries would mix the toxic metal into elixirs and tonics, often with honey or herbs to mask the taste. A slightly more direct approach was to apply it as an ointment, a greasy paste of mercury and lard that you would be instructed to rub all over your body, allowing the poison to slowly absorb through your skin. But the premium treatment, the most dramatic and most fashionable method, was fumigation. This was a procedure worthy of the scientific-sounding nonsense that backed it up. You would be placed inside a small, enclosed tent or a large wooden box with only your head sticking out of a hole in the top. Beneath the box, a pan of mercury would be heated over a fire, causing it to vaporize. For hours, you would sit there, trapped in your personal steam room, forced to breathe in the thick, toxic, metallic fumes. The goal was to make you sweat out the venereal poison, and the mercury fumes certainly made you sweat. They also made you choke, gag, and feel as if your very lungs were being coated in a thin layer of liquid metal. And now, for the side effects. This is where the true genius of the mercury cure reveals itself. The narrator will now calmly list the horrific signs of mercury poisoning. The first sign that the cure was working was a massive increase in salivation. You would begin to drool uncontrollably and profusely, sometimes producing several pints of saliva a day. This was not seen as a terrifying symptom of heavy metal poisoning. No, the doctors, in their infinite wisdom, hailed this as a magnificent success. The drool, they declared, was the bad humor of syphilis being triumphantly expelled from your body. You were literally drooling your disease away. The more you drooled, the better the cure was working. Next, the mercury would attack your gums. They would become spongy and inflamed, and your teeth, their foundations rotting away, would loosen in their sockets and begin to fall out. Again, this was often interpreted as a positive sign, another route for the poison to exit the body. Soon, a distinctive and foul odor, the mercurial fetor, would emanate from your breath, a smell of decay so powerful it could announce your presence from across the room. And then came the neurological damage. You would develop the mercurial tremors, a violent, uncontrollable shaking of the hands and limbs that made simple tasks like holding a cup impossible. Your memory would begin to fail. Your personality would change, becoming erratic and irritable. In the end, if the treatment was continued long enough, it led to full-blown madness. It was a desperate, terrifying gamble. The patient was caught in a race to see what would destroy them first. The syphilis eating their flesh from the outside, or the mercury dissolving their mind and body from the inside. You are sitting in the fumigation box, the air thick and shimmering with poison. You feel the telltale tingling in your gums, the first sign that your teeth are beginning to abandon their posts. You are drooling so much that a servant has to stand by with a bowl to catch the excess. You feel a strange tremor beginning in your hands, and through all this misery you cling to a single, desperate thought: it is working. The doctor said so. The cure is so powerful, so violent, you can feel it waging war inside your very bones. You have no way of knowing that the war is not against the disease, but against you. The mercury cure was the perfect Tudor medicine. Its effects were so immediate and so violent that no one could deny it was powerful, and it often left the patient too toothless, too shaken, and too insane to complain. For all the horrors of the Tudor medical world, the bleeding, the purging, the poisonous concoctions, there was one word that could still strike a level of primal, abject terror into the heart of any man, woman, or child. It was a word that carried the weight of a generational nightmare, a memory of a past apocalypse that was never truly past. That word was the plague. The Black Death of the 14th century was a distant memory, but its smaller, angrier cousins would return periodically to remind everyone that the ultimate killer was never truly gone. When the plague came to your town, all the elaborate theories of the four humours, all the star charts, all the medical confidence, simply evaporated, replaced by a frantic, superstitious panic. It would start as a whisper, a rumour of a sickness in the poorer quarter, a strange fever that moved too fast. Then the first red cross would appear, painted crudely on a locked door, a grim warning to all who passed. Soon, the church bells would begin to toll constantly, not for prayer times but for funerals. The sound would become the new, dreadful heartbeat of your town. At night, You would hear the rumble of the death cart in the street and the cry of "Bring out your dead." Fear, thick and suffocating, would descend. It was a tangible thing, an invisible miasma you could almost smell. And in the face of this terror, people would try anything. The official response was a mixture of panicked public health measures and complete medical confusion. The city council would order massive bonfires to be lit in the streets, hoping the heat and smoke could cleanse the corrupted air. The real doctors, university men with Latin scrolls and clean hands, were useless. They would gather to debate endlessly whether the plague came from a misalignment of planets, or perhaps God's wrath. The most common prescription, as always, was bloodletting, a spectacularly bad idea for a disease that already caused internal bleeding. But when your only tool is a knife, every problem looks like a vein that needs to be opened. With the official channels offering nothing but fire and failure, you, the terrified public, were left to your own devices. And this is where the desperation truly flowered into a garden of spectacular, grotesque absurdity. Imagine you develop the first sign, a bubo, a hard, painful black swelling in your armpit or groin. You summon the local wise woman. Her prescription is not an herbal tea, it is a live chicken. Thus was born the infamous chicken cure. The procedure, which she would explain with complete, matter-of-fact confidence, was to take a live chicken, shave its backside, and strap it, still clucking and struggling, directly onto your plague sore. The belief was that the chicken, through some sympathetic magic, would draw out the poison by breathing through its rear end. The poor bird usually died first, either from the disease or sheer fright, which was taken as confirming the theory that it had absorbed the sickness. You would then repeat the process with a new chicken, and another, until either you recovered or you ran out of poultry. If the chicken cure seemed too elaborate, there were other options drawn from the same book of desperate logic. One popular theory suggested that foul odors could drive away the foul air of the plague. This led to the bizarre practice of keeping goats inside your house, their pungent, barnyard smell thought to create a protective, anti-plague aroma. Your home would be filled with the stench of a goat, but at least it wasn't the stench of death, yet. The menu of bizarre remedies was long and varied, a testament to the boundless creativity of human fear. You might be told to rub onions on your skin or drink vinegar like it was holy water. If you were wealthy, you might be prescribed a course of swallowing crushed emeralds, the logic being that a precious stone must surely have the power to combat a vile disease. If you were poor, you might be told to find a dried toad and wear it in a bag around your neck, its warty skin believed to absorb the pestilence. One of the most horrifying cures, attested to in medical texts of the time, was to find a puppy, split it open, and apply the still warm carcass to your sores. The sheer, desperate insanity of it all is easy to mock from the safety of the future, but you must understand the terror that drove it. You were watching your friends, your family, your children die from a disease that no one understood and no one could stop. And in that void of knowledge, any action, no matter how absurd, felt better than doing nothing. People would rather do something wrong than nothing at all. In the face of invisible death, action, no matter how absurd, was its own form of faith. The chicken cure was not just a strange medical practice, it was a desperate prayer performed with a chicken. And so, as the plague swept through your town, the air would be thick not just with the smoke of bonfires, but with the smells of vinegar, garlic, and nervous goats. You would see your neighbours earnestly rubbing onions on their doors or burying strange charms in their gardens. And you would do it too, because in a world where the doctors were useless and God seemed to have gone silent, the idea that a chicken's backside might be your last, best hope was, somehow, the only thing that made any sense at all. After an exhaustive tour of the horrors of Tudor healthcare, the bleeding, the purging, the poisonous potions, the live spiders, A rational person from the future might ask a very simple question: why? Why did people go along with this? Why would you willingly submit to being bled, poisoned, and plastered with boiled dogs by a man who thought your headache was caused by a planet? The answer is simple, and it has very little to do with medicine. It has everything to do with fear, hope, and the power of a really good performance. You must first understand the terrifying psychological landscape of the 16th century. Your world is a chaotic and hostile place, governed by invisible and malevolent forces. A bad harvest, a sick cow, a sudden fever. These are not random misfortunes. They are signs, punishments, the workings of God, the devil, or a grumpy celestial body. You have no understanding of what is happening inside your own body, no sense of control over your own life. You are a passenger in a vessel of flesh, tossed on a stormy sea of superstition and fear. In the face of this overwhelming uncertainty, any action, no matter how absurd, feels better than doing nothing. In the face of invisible death, action, no matter how absurd, was its own form of faith. Into this world of fear steps the doctor. He is not just a healer, he is an actor, a high priest of the medical arts, and his consultation is a performance. Medicine had become theatre. If you looked like you were fighting the plague, people believed you were. Your physician arrives in his impressive robes, speaks in an incomprehensible dead language, and consults charts that map the entire cosmos. He projects an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. He doesn't guess. He declares. He doesn't suggest. He prescribes. His conviction is the first and most powerful part of the cure. He is selling you an authoritative narrative in a world that has none. The treatments themselves were not just medical procedures. They were dramatic special effects. A quiet herbal tea might have done you some good, but it was anticlimactic. A violent, gut-wrenching purge, however, that was a show. A public bloodletting, with its gleaming lancets and its crimson bowl. That was a spectacle. These brutal, painful rituals were, paradoxically, deeply comforting. Yet there was something comforting about the process. The more dramatic the treatment, the more one felt that something was being done. The pain, the vomiting, the dizziness from blood loss, these were not side effects. They were tangible proof that the cure was working. Your body was at war with the disease, and the doctor was simply giving it the weapons to fight. And this is where the most powerful drug in the entire Tudor pharmacopoeia comes into play: hope. In a world with no real cures for most serious illnesses, the belief that you were being treated was often the only effective medicine available. Hope, even false hope, was the only thing keeping anyone sane. The doctor, for all his spectacular incompetence, was a merchant of hope. He was selling you the belief that your suffering was not a random, meaningless event, but a diagnosable problem with a solvable, if painful, solution. Today, we would call this the placebo effect. We know that the mind has a powerful, if limited, ability to influence the body. If you believe, with every fiber of your being, that a treatment is working, your brain can release its own chemicals to reduce pain and create a sense of well-being. A doctor's visit was more ritual than science, a blend of pain, prayer, and placebo. The entire performance of Tudor medicine, the doctor's confidence, the dramatic procedures, your own desperate desire to be healed, created the perfect environment for this effect to take hold. You might feel a little better after being bled, not because your humors were rebalanced, but because you had just survived a terrifying ritual that you were told would save you. This also created a brilliant, self-sustaining, and completely unfalsifiable system. If you underwent a treatment and your body, through its own remarkable resilience, managed to heal itself, it was hailed as a medical miracle. The doctor took full credit, his reputation grew, and the treatment's effectiveness was confirmed. If, on the other hand, you were bled, purged, and you died, it was not the fault of the treatment. Of course not. It simply meant that your humoral imbalance was too severe, your sins too great, or that the planets were just hopelessly aligned against you. The system could never fail, only the patient could. So why did you believe? You believed because the alternative was to believe in nothing, to accept that your suffering was random and your fate was utterly out of your hands. You believed because the performance was convincing, and the hope it offered was the only anesthetic available. Every drop of blood spilled was a prayer in liquid form, a bargain struck between faith and fear. In the end, the most potent cure the Tudor doctor prescribed was the story he told you, a story of order in the midst of chaos, of action in the face of powerlessness, and of hope in the heart of despair. And sometimes faith was the only medicine left. After our grim tour through the pharmacopoeia of the bizarre, after the bleeding, the purging, the live spiders and the mercury fumes, we arrive at the final, crucial question. In a world of such spectacular medical incompetence, how did anyone survive at all? What was the true art of survival in the Tudor age? The answer is as simple as it is unsatisfying. It wasn't an art. It wasn't a science. It was a lottery. Colonial medicine was a game of chance played with blades, bottles, and prayers, and the same held true for the Tudors. Your survival depended less on the skill of your doctor and more on sheer, blind, dumb luck. Think of your illness as a high-stakes game. The first ticket you drew was the diagnosis itself, a complete guess based on a 1,500-year-old theory of imbalanced humours. The next ticket was the treatment, a violent assault on your body designed to rebalance fluids that didn't need rebalancing. Your primary battle was no longer against your disease. It was against the well-intentioned but lethal efforts of your own doctor. You were not trying to get better. You were trying to survive the cure. In this grim lottery, it must be luck played a larger role than anyone admitted. Two patients with the same illness might receive identical treatment. One would recover, the other would die. To the Tudor physician, that was simply the will of God, or perhaps a sign of the deceased patient's weak moral character. But the truth was far simpler. The person who survived was often the person with the strongest constitution, the one whose body was robust enough to fight a war on two fronts, against the disease itself and against the doctor's friendly fire. Luck might mean having a doctor who was lazy and prescribed bed rest instead of aggressive bleeding, or it might mean visiting a wise woman who, by chance, gave you an herbal remedy that actually worked, like willow bark for pain. But this is where the system's most brilliant and insidious feature kicks in. If you survived, if your body, through its own remarkable resilience, managed to heal itself, it was never seen as luck. It was always, without question, proof that the cure had worked. In that uncertain world, survival itself was considered proof that the cure had worked, even when it hadn't. Your survival becomes another 5-star review for a 1-star treatment, another glowing testimonial that kept the entire, deadly system afloat for centuries. So you survived. You won the lottery. But what is the meaning of all that suffering? What is the legacy of the thousands, the millions who drew the losing ticket? Their stories are not forgotten. They have become the ghosts in our modern medical cabinet. Our world of medicine, a world of sterilized tools, clinical trials, and evidence-based procedures, was not a gift from brilliant scientists in a moment of enlightened discovery. It was built slowly, painfully, upon a mountain of corpses left behind by centuries of well-intentioned quackery. It was paid for in blood, in poison, and in pain. The shift from the age of humours to the age of science happened not because of one great idea, but because of the crushing weight of 1,000,000 failures. Eventually, a few brave observers started to notice that the patients who were bled the most tended to die the fastest. They noticed that the laudable pus on a wound was a precursor to death, not recovery. They started to count, to record, to compare, and in doing so, they began to listen to the stories the dead were telling. Every safety procedure we take for granted today is a monument to a past tragedy. Every sterilized scalpel is a ghost of a patient who died from a filthy amputation. Every double-blind clinical trial is a ghost of 1,000 patients who were the unwitting subjects of a doctor's terrible guess. Every warning label on a bottle of pills is a ghost of someone who was poisoned by a miracle cure. We live in a world plastered with warning labels not because corporations suddenly developed a conscience, but because of the ghosts of countless consumers who happily, hopefully, and desperately sprinkled, played with, and breathed in the future, only to discover it was fatal. Your hypothetical suffering in this story, the bleeding, the purging, the terror, was not in vain. It became a data point in the great, bloody argument for a better, safer, and more rational world. The art of survival in the Tudor era was a brutal game of chance. The legacy of that game is the science that ensures we never have to play it again. And so, the age of the four humours fades into the past, leaving behind a quiet sense of gratitude. Gratitude that a trip to the doctor today is a matter of science and evidence, not of star charts and live frogs. With that final thought, our journey through the terrifying world of Tudor medicine is over. Thank you for joining me. If you found this time relaxing, I hope you'll return for another story. But for now, it's time to let the story go. Let the doctor's nonsensical charts, the strange and bubbling potions, and the glint of the surgeon's knife all dissolve into the soft darkness of your own room. There are no more humours to balance, and no more bizarre cures to fear. There is only this moment of peace, and the gentle promise of sleep. Rest well. Good night.